New York City, a stormy night. The city buzzed with lights and motion, but for Ethan Sullivan, heir to a billion-dollar real estate empire, the world felt like a battlefield. Seated in his luxurious penthouse, he stared at the contract his mother, Eleanor Sullivan, had shoved in front of him earlier that morning. A marriage contract, arranged, with the daughter of a prominent business partner. Ethan crumpled the paper in his clenched fist. Ridiculous. He barked to no one in particular. To him, it was another blatant attempt by his mother to manipulate his life. But this time, he wouldn't cave. He needed a way out, and fast. As an audacious idea took root in his mind, Ethan grabbed his phone and dialed his trusted attorney and best friend, Liam Carter. "Meet me at Delancey at 9. I have a plan." Delancey, the most exclusive restaurant in the city. The room was alive with the elite and the glamorous, but Ethan, with his towering presence and natural charisma, outshone them all. By the time Liam arrived, Ethan already had a glass of whiskey in hand and a glint of mischief in his eyes. "You look like you're about to start trouble," Liam said, settling into the plush chair across from him. "I'm hiring a wife," Ethan announced, no hesitation in his tone. Liam nearly choked on his water. "You're joking. Even for you, Ethan, that's insane." Ethan leaned forward, his voice dropping to a serious tone. "It's straightforward. I find someone willing to pretend to be my wife for a few months. It blocks this arranged marriage, and my mother gets off my back." Liam stared at him for a moment, then burst into laughter. "You're serious, aren't you?" Deadpan, Ethan replied. "Do I look like I'm joking?" Across town, Emily Harper sat in a modest apartment, poring over unpaid bills. Her salary as a private tutor barely covered the essentials. With her mother hospitalized and medical expenses piling up, Emily felt cornered. A message popped up on a private job forum she frequented, and her curiosity was piqued. Seeking an educated woman with proper manners to act as a contracted wife. Pay generous. Duration 6 months. Discretion required. Her initial reaction was disbelief. Who would post something so outrageous? But as the number of zeros in the pay figure sank in, she hesitated. Her mother's hospital bills flashed through her mind. With a shaky breath, she responded to the ad, unsure if she was stepping into an opportunity or a disaster. 2 days later, in Liam's office, Ethan sifted through profiles Liam had compiled from the applicants. Too flashy. Too demanding. "Next," he muttered as he tossed profiles into a growing discard pile. When he reached Emily's profile, something about her photo gave him pause. She had a natural beauty, a quiet dignity that stood out among the polished and artificial smiles. "This one." "Set up a meeting," he said, pointing at her photo. The meeting. That evening, Ethan waited at a secluded cafe, his sharp suit contrasting with the warm, rustic ambiance. When Emily walked in, he immediately noticed her. She wasn't dressed to impress, but her grace and confidence commanded attention. Emily, on the other hand, was doing her best to steady her nerves. She'd Googled Ethan Sullivan after receiving the meeting details and was floored by his reputation, not to mention his wealth. The man who stood before her exuded power, but there was also an arrogance that made her bristle. "You understand the terms?" Ethan asked, his voice calm but direct. "Yes," Emily replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "But I need assurances that this arrangement will be safe for me, and I want the payment up front." A corner of Ethan's mouth lifted into a smirk. "You're bold. I like that." Emily wasn't sure if she'd just passed a test or fallen into a trap. The two negotiated finer details over coffee, with Ethan laying out his expectations. She would attend high-profile events, play the part of the doting wife, and deal with his overbearing mother. In exchange, she would receive an amount of money that would erase her debts and secure her future. By the end of the night, they signed the contract. It was official. Emily Harper was now, on paper, Mrs. Ethan Sullivan. Ethan's penthouse, later that night. Alone in his study, Ethan sipped another glass of whiskey and stared at the skyline. This plan, however clever, was risky. His mother was sharp, and the woman he'd chosen was a wild card. But desperation had left him no choice. Meanwhile, Emily sat in her tiny apartment, holding a copy of the signed contract. Her hands trembled as the weight of her decision settled in. What had she gotten herself into? Neither of them realized that this agreement, born out of necessity and defiance, would become something far more complicated and life-changing. Ethan Sullivan's penthouse. 2 days later. The air buzzed with quiet tension as Emily stepped out of the elevator, escorted by the building's concierge. She clutched her bag tightly, her knuckles white, as she took in the grandeur of the place. Polished marble floors, walls adorned with abstract art, and a breathtaking view of the city through floor-to-ceiling windows. This wasn't her world. Ethan stood near the bar, pouring himself a drink. He turned at the sound of her heels clicking against the floor, his sharp blue eyes scanning her from head to toe. She wore a simple dress, modest but elegant. Practical, Ethan noted. No pretense. "You're late," he said, his voice cutting through the silence. Emily raised an eyebrow, suppressing the urge to retort. "I had to finish a tutoring session before coming. Some of us actually work for a living." Ethan smirked, amused by her bite. "Fair enough, come, let's talk." He led her to a seating area where Liam was already waiting with a stack of documents. Emily sat stiffly on the edge of a plush couch, acutely aware of how out of place she felt. Liam greeted her warmly, offering a sharp contrast to Ethan's cold demeanor. "These are the final details of the arrangement," Liam began, sliding a folder toward Emily. "You'll need to familiarize yourself with Ethan's background, preferences, and public persona. The first event is tomorrow night, a gala hosted by the Sullivan Foundation." Emily opened the folder, her eyes widening as she scanned the information. Ethan's life was a carefully curated spectacle, filled with strategic relationships and endless scrutiny. Her role, as outlined in black and white, was to play the perfect wife, poised, supportive, and unshakably loyal. "I assume you'll provide me with the appropriate attire for such events?" she asked, her tone measured. Ethan's lips twitched. "You assume correctly. I've arranged for a stylist to meet you tomorrow morning." Emily glanced at him, her gaze unwavering. "Good. I'd hate to embarrass you by showing up underdressed." Ethan chuckled softly, more to himself than to her. "You're full of surprises, Miss Harper." The Sullivan Foundation Gala, the following night. The grand ballroom shimmered with opulence, every detail meticulously designed to impress. Ethan stood near the entrance, adjusting the cufflinks on his tailored tuxedo. He was used to being the center of attention, but tonight he felt a flicker of something unusual: anticipation. When Emily arrived, escorted by one of Ethan's drivers, she stepped out of the car wearing a sleek navy gown that hugged her figure without being ostentatious. Her hair was styled elegantly, and the sapphire earrings she wore, borrowed, not owned, glinted under the light. Heads turned as she walked up the marble steps, her composure radiating confidence. Ethan's eyes narrowed as he watched her approach. "You clean up well," he remarked, offering his arm. Emily hesitated for a fraction of a second before taking it. "So do you," she replied, her tone neutral, but her eyes sparkling with subtle defiance. Inside the ballroom, the two navigated a sea of socialites and business magnates. Ethan introduced Emily to key figures with ease, his hand resting lightly on the small of her back, a gesture that felt both possessive and protective. Emily played her part flawlessly, smiling politely, engaging in small talk, and laughing at just the right moments. But the real test came when Eleanor Sullivan made her entrance. Eleanor Sullivan, the formidable matriarch of the Sullivan family. Her presence commanded attention as she strode into the room, draped in an emerald green gown. Her sharp eyes scanned the crowd until they landed on Ethan and Emily. With a calculated smile, she approached. "Ethan," Eleanor began, her voice smooth but laced with authority. "And this must be Emily, your wife." Emily extended a hand, her smile unwavering. "Mrs. Sullivan, it's a pleasure to meet you." Eleanor's gaze flicked to Emily's hand before she accepted it briefly. "Likewise. I must say, you're not what I expected." "Is that a good thing or a bad thing?" Emily asked, her tone polite but pointed. Ethan suppressed a grin as Eleanor's eyebrows lifted in surprise. "We'll see," Eleanor replied coolly before turning her attention back to her son. "I hope you realize what's at stake tonight, Ethan. Don't embarrass the family." Ethan's jaw tightened, but he nodded curtly. "I never do." As Eleanor moved on to greet other guests, Emily exhaled softly. "She's intense." "That's putting it mildly," Ethan muttered. "She'll be watching you like a hawk. Don't give her a reason to doubt us." Later that night, the gala was a success. Ethan and Emily maintained their facade impeccably, leaving no room for suspicion. But as they rode back to the penthouse in silence, the weight of the night settled over them. "You were good tonight," Ethan said finally, breaking the silence. Better than I expected. Emily glanced at him, her expression unwritable. Thank you, I think. Ethan smirked. Don't get too comfortable. This is just the beginning. Emily leaned back in her seat, staring out at the city lights. Believe me, I'm well aware. As the car pulled up to the penthouse, Ethan felt a strange pang of respect for the woman beside him. She was different, sharp, unyielding. And for the first time in years, he wondered if he might have underestimated someone. The next morning, the Sullivan penthouse. Emily woke up in her designated guest room, the soft morning light streaming through the tall windows. She stretched, her body still tense from the previous night's gala. It had gone better than expected, but Eleanor's piercing gaze lingered in her mind like a shadow. She dressed simply, dark jeans and a crisp blouse, and made her way to the kitchen, where Ethan was already seated at the marble counter, sipping his coffee and scrolling through emails on his tablet. He didn't look up when she entered. "Good morning," she said, forcing a cheerful tone. Ethan glanced at her over his cup, his expression unreadable. "You're awake early." "I'm not the type to sleep in," she replied, pouring herself a cup of coffee. She hesitated, then added, "Last night was intense." Ethan chuckled softly. "Welcome to my world. Eleanor is relentless, but you handled her well." Emily smiled faintly. "Thanks, though I doubt she's convinced." Ethan leaned back in his chair, studying her. "She'll never be fully convinced, but that's not your problem. It's mine. Just stick to the plan, and we'll get through this." Emily nodded, but something about his words unsettled her. There was an edge to him, a vulnerability he kept hidden behind his arrogance. She wondered how much of Ethan Sullivan was real, and how much was a carefully constructed mask. Eleanor Sullivan wasn't a woman to be easily deceived. After the gala, she'd made a discreet phone call to her assistant, instructing her to dig into Emily Harper's background. Eleanor didn't trust this sudden marriage, and she certainly didn't trust the woman her son had chosen. As she sat in her sunlit study, reviewing the initial report, her lips pressed into a thin line. Emily was clean, too clean. No criminal record, no scandals, no connections to anyone in Ethan's world. A quiet, unassuming life. Suspiciously unremarkable. "Who are you, Emily Harper?" Eleanor murmured, her sharp mind already formulating a plan to uncover the truth. Ethan had spent the morning in meetings, leaving Emily to explore the penthouse. She admired the sleek modern design but found it cold and impersonal, a reflection of its owner. As she wandered into his home office, a framed photograph on the desk caught her eye. It was Ethan as a young boy, standing next to a man who could only be his father. They were on a yacht, laughing, carefree. The stark contrast to the serious, guarded man Ethan had become struck her. She was so lost in thought that she didn't hear him enter. "What are you doing in here?" Ethan's voice was sharp, startling her. Emily turned quickly, her cheeks flushing. "I wasn't snooping. I just saw the photo." Ethan's gaze flicked to the frame, and his expression softened momentarily before hardening again. "That's none of your concern." "I didn't mean to pry," Emily said, her voice gentle. I can't imagine you ever being that carefree." Ethan's jaw tightened. "That was a long time ago. People change." Before she could respond, his phone buzzed, breaking the moment. Ethan answered tersely, his mood darkening further as he spoke. After ending the call, he turned to Emily, his eyes cold. "We have another event tonight. Be ready by 7, and wear something that will make them talk, for the right reasons." Emily wore a shimmering gold gown Ethan's stylist had chosen, her hair swept up in an elegant chignon. When she descended the stairs to meet Ethan, his usual composed expression faltered for a split second. "Do you look?" He trailed off, clearing his throat. "Appropriate," Emily smirked. "I'll take that as a compliment." They arrived at the auction to a flurry of flashing cameras and murmured whispers. Emily felt every gaze on her, but she walked beside Ethan with her head held high. Inside, they mingled with the elite, Ethan effortlessly navigating the crowd while Emily played her part flawlessly. But the evening took a turn when Eleanor appeared, accompanied by Vivian Price, the woman Eleanor had originally chosen for Ethan. Vivian was everything Emily wasn't. Statuesque, polished, and impossibly poised. She greeted Ethan with an air of familiarity that made Emily's stomach churn. "Ethan?" Vivian purred, placing a hand on his arm. "It's been far too long." "Vivian," Ethan replied coolly, stepping back slightly. This is my wife, Emily. Vivian's eyes flicked to Emily, her smile barely concealing her disdain. Charmed, she said, her tone dripping with insincerity. Ethan never mentioned you. Emily forced a smile. That's probably because we've been too busy enjoying our time together. Vivian raised an eyebrow, clearly unimpressed. How lovely. Ethan, you must excuse me. I simply must catch up with you later. As Vivian walked away, Emily turned to Ethan, her voice low. She's charming. Ethan sighed. Ignore her. Vivian's just another pawn in my mother's game. Emily hesitated. Doesn't it bother you, having to constantly navigate these games? Ethan glanced at her, something unspoken flickering in his eyes. You get used to it. Later that night back at the penthouse. The tension between them simmered as they entered the penthouse. Emily kicked off her heels and sank onto the couch, rubbing her temples. Your mother and Vivian make quite the team. Ethan poured himself a drink, his movements precise and controlled. Don't let them get to you. This is temporary. Emily looked up at him, her frustration bubbling over. Maybe for you, but for me, it's 6 months of being judged, scrutinized, and constantly reminded that I don't belong in your world. Ethan set his glass down, his expression softening. Emily, you belong here more than half the people we met tonight. Don't let them make you feel otherwise. The sincerity in his voice caught her off guard. For a moment, the walls between them seemed to crack, but before she could respond, Ethan turned away, retreating to his room. Emily sat in silence, staring at the city lights. She had agreed to this arrangement for the money, but as the days passed, she realized it was much more than a transaction. And that terrified her. The next morning, Ethan's office. Ethan was already immersed in a sea of spreadsheets and contracts when Emily knocked lightly on the doorframe. He looked up, his piercing blue eyes narrowing slightly. You don't have to knock, he said, leaning back in his chair. This is your home now, remember? Emily stepped in, her posture tentative. It doesn't feel like home, she admitted softly, letting her gaze drift to the skyline visible through the massive windows. It feels like a stage. Ethan's lips twitched, almost forming a smirk. That's exactly what it is, and you're the star performer. Emily crossed her arms, bristling at his dismissive tone. Maybe you should consider that I didn't grow up with this charade. Some of us have to learn as we go. Ethan regarded her for a moment, then stood, his tall frame imposing but not threatening. You did fine last night, he said, his voice softer now. Better than I expected. High praise, Emily muttered, rolling her eyes. A rare chuckle escaped him. It's a start. Now we have a fundraiser dinner tonight. This one's smaller, more intimate. No cameras, just you, me, and a few key players. Emily raised an eyebrow. So no pressure then. Exactly, Ethan said, handing her a neatly printed agenda. You're catching on. Later that evening, the Sullivan family's private retreat. The dinner was held in a sprawling estate just outside the city. Unlike the gala's grandeur, this event had an air of exclusivity. The dining room was set for only 10 people, the table adorned with understated yet expensive decor. Emily felt the weight of the eyes on her as they entered, Ethan's hand lightly resting on her back. Among the guests were influential board members of Sullivan Enterprises, and of course Eleanor Sullivan, whose gaze was as sharp as ever. As they took their seats, Eleanor leaned forward, her tone deceptively warm. Emily, dear, you must tell us. How did you and Ethan meet? Emily froze for half a beat, her mind racing. The story they'd rehearsed was simple enough, but the way Eleanor was looking at her made her second-guess every detail. Ethan stepped in smoothly, his voice calm and steady. She was tutoring one of my business partner's children, Ethan said. We met at an event. I was immediately drawn to her intelligence and authenticity. The room hummed with polite murmurs of approval, but Eleanor's expression remained unreadable. How charming, she said, though her tone dripped with skepticism. And what do you think of our world, Emily? Surely it's quite a change from your usual surroundings. Emily forced a smile. It's different, yes, but I think there's beauty in every world, don't you? Eleanor tilted her head, her smile razor-sharp. Indeed. As the evening progressed, the questions became more probing. Vivian was also in attendance, seated directly across from Emily. Her presence was like a storm cloud, radiating subtle hostility. During dessert, she seized her moment. Emily, Vivian began, her voice sweet but edged. It must be overwhelming stepping into such a high-profile role. Tell me, how do you handle the scrutiny? Emily met her gaze, refusing to flinch. I focus on what's important. As long as Ethan and I are on the same page, the rest is just noise. Vivian's smile faltered, but before she could retort, Ethan spoke up, his tone cool and commanding. Emily has adapted remarkably well. I couldn't ask for a better partner. The table fell silent, and Emily glanced at Ethan, surprised by the conviction in his voice. For a moment, it felt like he wasn't just playing a role. Later, on the drive back to the penthouse, the silence in the car was heavy, the events of the night replaying in Emily's mind. She finally broke the quiet. Do you ever get tired of it? Ethan didn't look at her, his gaze fixed on the road ahead. Tired of what? This constant performance, she said. Always saying the right thing, playing the right part. Ethan sighed, running a hand through his hair. It's not about wanting to do it. It's about needing to. People like my mother, my competitors, they're always watching, waiting for a mistake. If you let them see a crack, they'll tear you apart. Emily studied him, her irritation fading into something closer to understanding. That sounds exhausting. It is, he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. For a moment they sat in shared silence, the city lights flashing by. It was the first time Ethan seemed truly human to her, not just the arrogant billionaire she'd agreed to marry. Back at the penthouse, the air between them shifted. As Emily poured herself a glass of water in the kitchen, Ethan appeared in the doorway, loosening his tie. He hesitated, as if debating whether to say something, then leaned against the counter. You handled tonight well, he said. Even with Vivian and my mother throwing curveballs. Emily shrugged, her lips curving into a small smile. I've dealt with worse. Kids can be surprisingly ruthless. Ethan laughed softly, the sound genuine. I'll take your word for it. There was a moment of quiet between them, comfortable this time. Emily looked at him, her curiosity getting the better of her. Do you ever wonder what your life would be like if you didn't have all this? Money, power, expectations. Ethan's smile faded slightly. All the time, but it's not about what I want, it's about what's expected of me. Emily nodded, her heart aching unexpectedly for him. Maybe it's time to stop living for everyone else. Ethan's gaze lingered on her, something unreadable in his eyes. Maybe. The penthouse early morning. Emily woke to the distant hum of the city below. She had hoped the morning would bring some sense of calm, but the weight of the previous night lingered. She replayed the sharp exchanges with Eleanor and Vivian, the calculating gazes of the guests. Her life had become a chessboard, and she was a piece in Ethan's game. She found him in the living room, his tie undone and a cup of coffee in hand as he stared out at the skyline. He looked different in the morning light, less the polished billionaire and more real. You're up early, she said softly, her voice breaking the silence. Ethan glanced at her, a faint smile tugging at his lips. Habit, you? Couldn't sleep, she admitted, sitting on the couch. Last night was a lot, he chuckled dryly. Welcome to the Sullivan world. Emily hesitated, then asked, was Vivian ever? Not important. Ethan cut her off, his tone sharp. She's my mother's idea of the perfect match. That's all. Emily nodded, sensing the topic was closed, but a flicker of vulnerability in his eyes stayed with her. Eleanor paced her study, her manicured nails tapping against a folder. Her investigation into Emily had turned up nothing scandalous, but Eleanor wasn't satisfied. She was convinced that no woman without ulterior motives would marry her son so suddenly. Have her followed, she instructed her assistant. I want every detail of her life before Ethan. Yes, ma'am, the assistant replied, leaving the room. Eleanor's eyes narrowed as she stared out the window. Let's see how long this facade lasts, my dear. Ethan had a meeting, leaving her with some rare free time. She decided to explore the city, needing a break from the gilded cage she now called home. She wandered through Central Park, breathing in the crisp autumn air. As she sat on a bench, lost in thought, her phone buzzed. It was an unknown number. She hesitated, then answered. Emily Harper, a female voice said, sharp and cold. This is Eleanor Sullivan. Emily's stomach tightened. Mrs. Sullivan, how did you get my number? Eleanor ignored the question. I thought we should have a proper conversation, just the two of us. Meet me at the Ivy at 3 p.m. Don't be late. Before Emily could respond, the line went dead. Emily arrived at exactly 3 p.m., her nerves taut as she stepped inside. Eleanor was already seated, her posture regal and her expression unreadable. Emily, she said, motioning for her to sit. Punctual, I like that. Emily took her seat, keeping her composure. You wanted to talk? Eleanor studied her, her piercing gaze unrelenting. Let's not waste time. I don't believe for a second that this marriage is real. Emily's heart raced, but she kept her face neutral. I'm sorry you feel that way. Eleanor leaned forward, her voice low but sharp. You don't belong in this world, and you know it. Whatever your endgame is, I'll find out. Emily met her gaze, refusing to back down. With all due respect, Mrs. Sullivan, your son chose me. If you have an issue with that, you should take it up with him. Eleanor's eyes narrowed. You're bold, I'll give you that, but boldness doesn't guarantee survival in this family. The tension between them was palpable. Emily stood, her hands steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. Thank you for the coffee, Mrs. Sullivan. If you'll excuse me, I have somewhere else to be. Eleanor watched her leave. A flicker of something like respect crossing her face before it hardened again. Emily was still fuming when Ethan walked in, his tie loosened and his expression weary. He stopped when he saw her pacing the living room. What happened? He asked, his brow furrowing. Your mother, Emily said, spinning to face him. She called me, demanded I meet her. Ethan's jaw tightened. What did she say? Emily hesitated. She doesn't believe us. She's digging into my past. Ethan ran a hand through his hair, muttering a curse under his breath. I'll handle her. Emily crossed her arms. Why does she hate me so much? Ethan looked at her, his expression softening. She doesn't hate you, she hates that she can't control me anymore. Emily's breath hitched at the honesty in his voice. That must be exhausting. Ethan gave a dry laugh. You have no idea. For a moment they stood in silence, the weight of their shared predicament settling over them. Then Ethan stepped closer, his voice softer now. You were brave to stand up to her, not many people do. Emily shrugged, trying to hide the tremor in her voice. She doesn't scare me. Ethan smirked, his gaze lingering on her. Maybe you're stronger than I thought. 2 days later, Sullivan Enterprises headquarters. Ethan stood in his corner office, the Manhattan skyline sprawling behind him. He was finishing a call with a board member when his assistant, Grace, stepped in. Mr. Sullivan, she began, her tone hesitant. Your mother called. She wants to remind you about the family dinner tonight. Ethan's jaw tightened. Of course she does. Anything else? Grace hesitated. She specifically requested that you bring Emily. Ethan sighed, his frustration simmering beneath his composed exterior. Tell her we'll be there. That evening, at the Sullivan estate, Emily felt her nerves mounting as the car approached the sprawling estate. She wore a soft, emerald green dress that Ethan's stylist had chosen for her, its elegant simplicity drawing attention to her natural beauty. Ethan sat beside her, impeccably dressed as always, but unusually quiet. What's on your mind? She asked, breaking the silence. He glanced at her, his expression guarded. Family dinners with my mother are always strategic. Strategic? Emily repeated, raising an eyebrow. She uses them to test everyone. Tonight, you'll be the target. Emily straightened, her determination hardening. Let her. I can handle it. Ethan's lips curved into a faint smile. I don't doubt that. Inside the estate, the atmosphere was charged. The dining room was an opulent masterpiece, with a crystal chandelier casting a warm glow over the long table. Eleanor sat at the head, her posture regal and her gaze sharp. Beside her was Vivian, who greeted Ethan with an overly familiar smile. Emily was seated directly across from Vivian, an arrangement that felt more like a deliberate move than a coincidence. The other guests included key figures from Sullivan Enterprises and a couple of influential family friends, all of whom seemed eager to observe the new Mrs. Sullivan. As the dinner progressed, Eleanor steered the conversation toward Emily. Emily, dear, she began, her tone deceptively kind. Tell us, how do you find time to support Ethan's demanding schedule while adjusting to this new lifestyle? Emily smiled politely, sensing the trap. It's an adjustment, of course, but Ethan and I make a good team. We balance each other. How charming, Vivian interjected, her tone dripping with sarcasm. Ethan has always been a perfectionist. I imagine that must be intimidating. Emily met Vivian's gaze head-on, her smile unwavering. Not at all. I see it as a challenge, a good one. Eleanor's lips tightened ever so slightly, while Ethan's gaze flicked between the two women, a glimmer of amusement in his eyes. The turning point of the evening came during dessert. Eleanor raised her glass, a faint smile playing on her lips. "To family," she said, her tone carrying an edge. "May we always uphold the Sullivan name with dignity and strength." Everyone raised their glasses, but Emily noticed the way Eleanor's eyes lingered on her. She braced herself as Eleanor set down her glass and addressed her directly. "Emily," Eleanor began, "I must admit, I was surprised when Ethan introduced us. He's always been so particular. What do you think it was that drew him to you?" The room fell silent, all eyes on Emily. She could feel Ethan tense beside her, but she didn't falter. "Well," Emily began, her voice steady, "I suppose you'd have to ask Ethan that. But if I had to guess, I'd say he appreciates authenticity. In a world full of pretense, I think that's rare." Eleanor's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Indeed." Vivian leaned forward, her voice silky. "And yet, authenticity can be so subjective." Ethan's voice cut through the tension, sharp and commanding. "That's enough." All eyes turned to him as he leaned back in his chair, his gaze icy. Emily doesn't need to justify herself to anyone, least of all here. The room fell into an awkward silence, broken only by the clinking of silverware. Emily glanced at Ethan, a flicker of gratitude in her eyes, but he didn't look at her. On the drive back, the tension between them simmered. Emily stared out the window, the city lights blurring past. She finally turned to Ethan. "Why did you defend me back there?" Ethan sighed, his grip on the steering wheel tightening. "Because they were out of line." Emily frowned. "You could have ignored it. That's what you usually do." Ethan's jaw tightened. "I didn't want to." Emily studied him, her frustration giving way to curiosity. "What's really going on, Ethan? You act like this is all a game, but sometimes it feels like more." Ethan didn't respond immediately. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet. "I don't know." Emily blinked, startled by his honesty. "You don't know?" Ethan glanced at her, his expression unreadable. "This was supposed to be simple, but you make it complicated?" Emily's heart raced, but she didn't press him further. Instead, they rode the rest of the way in silence, the air between them charged with unspoken emotions. Later that night, in the penthouse, Emily stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, gazing out at the city. She heard Ethan's footsteps behind her, but didn't turn. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice unusually gentle. She nodded. "I'm fine, just tired." Ethan stepped closer, the tension from the car ride still lingering. "You handled yourself well tonight." Emily turned to him, her eyes searching his. "Do you mean that?"